You're after something. Is it revenge? Money? Or is it something else?
No, it's money. Definitely money.
Tonight, finally feeling free and it feels so right. Oh, time to do the things I like.
Okay. Let me begin by saying that your enjoyment of a film is entirely subjective. It's based on your personal preferences, colored by your expectations, and shaped by your experiences in life. If you liked a movie and I did not, both perspectives are valid, true things that genuinely happen to us. What I'm about to say does not mean that you can't like Solo, a Star Wars story. If you find the taste of feces sexually arousing, and I do not, those are both real experiences. Both are true ways of seeing the world. My argument is that even if you liked it, it was probably not a healthy experience for you. I hate Solo, a Star Wars story. I hate it with every fiber of my being. Not because it's bad. It's really not. It isn't poorly directed. It isn't poorly acted. It isn't poorly well, it's got some problems with darkness and contrast. But the special effects are pretty good. Especially L3, but we'll get to her. I don't hate it for the quality of production. No. I hate it for what it does, for what it doesn't do, and most of all, for what it represents. When my friend and I walked out of the theater, he asked me what I thought with a smirk that said he already had a good guess. I immediately shouted, "F*** that movie and everyone who made it." I then proceeded to curse the names of everyone I could remember who had anything to do with it. To clarify, I rarely get so worked up about a movie. It's rare for me to get invested in a good movie, much less a bad one. I expected to think that either the film was okay or just disappointing. There is only one other movie that sparked such rage in me in recent memory. And that was Batman v Superman. That is a whole other story. I'll admit it, I grew up with the original trilogy. When I was 10, I must have watched all 3 movies a dozen times. I got the toys, I played the games, I imagined myself in that world. They hold a special place in my heart. Solo, a Star Wars story, just pisses all over my hollowed memories. It was just so paint by numbers, designed by committee, corporate greed-filled, creatively bankrupt, missing that point that I struggled to sit the whole way through. Wish I had left the theater. Wish I hadn't seen it in the first place. I wish it had never been made. God, I wish that. Everything in Solo, a Star Wars story, is just so predictable. It's flat, boring, borrows so heavily from the original trilogy that if you've seen episodes 4 and 5, you know basically 60% of the things that are going to happen in Solo, a Star Wars story. And that's on top of it being a prequel where it's like, is Chewie going to die in this scene? This is so intense. What's going to happen? Solo, the Star Wars story, is a steaming pile of references draped over the bones of a thoroughly mediocre heist movie and probably the least immersive film I've ever seen. Let me explain that. One of the most important things a good movie should do is draw you in. It should be so interesting and believable that you forget that you're watching a screen and just lose yourself in the fictional world. The original trilogy does this effortlessly. Solo, the Star Wars story, failed miserably in this, primarily due to the constant references. To be clear, there are 2 kinds of references. One way is to have things from other works influence yours. Subtle nods, inspirations, moments of realization that add depth to either film. This is exemplified in, ironically, another Harrison Ford movie, Blade Runner 2049. Sure, there are a bunch of things from the first movie, but that story is entirely its own, expanding and changing what came before. The other is to be frigging Deadpool and wink at the camera and wait for the audience to clap at just how much they like being pandered to.
No. Wham!
Nothing in Solo, a Star Wars story, felt subtle. The callbacks are forced, awkward, and just plain fisted right up your asshole. Every reference felt like unnecessary attention was being drawn to make sure you didn't miss it. For me, it was the equivalent of sitting next to a nerdy fanboy and having him poke me in the ribs every 5 minutes going, oh, remember that? That's the same mask that Lando wore in Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Except now Woody Harrelson is wearing it. Remember? You remember that? Isn't that neat? And then I have to say, for the love of God, I'm trying to watch a movie.
Lock me up and throw away the key!
This can be best summed up in the scene where Chewbacca is introduced. Han asks, so what's your name? And he growls his thing back. And then Han f***ing says,
You're gonna need a nickname, because I ain't saying that every time.
Really? Really? You're gonna give him a nickname? Had no idea. Would it be so hard to have him just give him the nickname instead of basically breaking the fourth wall? All he had to do was call him Chewie. Maybe have Chewbacca be miffed, and Han says, too late, you're Chewie now. Anything. Nothing. In the new Blade Runner, there's a scene where you can see a sign for Pan Am in the background. I loved it, in part because nobody pointed at the damn thing to say, wow, would you believe that they were still in business in 2049? It's just a little detail from the past that did not distract from the new story. Solo, Star Wars story, is a huge steaming wad of answers
To a question no one asked!
How did Han get his pistol? How did he meet Chewie? How did he meet Lando? When did he first fly the Millennium Falcon? How did he win it? Spoiler, it's in a card game with Lando, like they said in 5. What's the Kessel Run? Why does the 12 parsecs thing mean it goes fast? And last, but certainly not f***ing least, why is Solo, a Star Wars story, called Solo, a Star Wars story? Yes, Han Solo gets his surname in this movie, and it's in the stupidest f***ing way possible. Turns out, Han was born with no last name. He later mentions a father he wasn't particularly close to, but was in his life long enough for him to remember. Guess he didn't give him a name, though. So he's trying to escape this whole planet that he lives on, and he finds a way with an Imperial recruiter. There's a little ad they run. It's kind of cute and a decent enough way to progress the story. When he goes to the register, the officer asks his name, to which Han replies that he's just Han. The officer asks who he's with, and Han says he has no one. So the recruiter, this random military paper pusher, thinks for a minute, and then with a hint of pride, decides that he can be Han Solo. Star Wars story. Han does not argue with this, and the officer is not concerned at all that he has no ID, no money, or literally anything other than the clothes on his back. I hate this scene so much. Not only is it dumb, not only is it unnecessary, but it devalues the once cool-sounding name he had. When I was young, I knew what the word Solo meant, but this was Star Wars. It was full of goofy aliens with weird names. I assumed that Solo, Star Wars story, was his actual name, and nobody in-universe thought that the Solo, Star Wars story, was literal. Nobody in the original trilogy calls attention to the fact that his name is also a word. It's like a girl being named Summer. Yeah, that's a word, but nobody cares. It's a name. Summer is not a description for her situation in life. I have a friend named Outlaw, and you can bet your ass I called attention to it when I first learned that because I honestly didn't believe it was their real name. It is, by the way, and that's awesome. So then we fast forward 3 years, and he's still in the army. This is a ridiculously long time for a smug asshole who openly questions authority to stay in the armed forces. Anyway, he deserts and is thus assigned the death penalty. He escapes, not without killing a few of his fellow soldiers, and now he's out on his own with presumably a warrant out for his arrest. He does not change his name. Firstly, he doesn't like the Empire anymore, enough to kill some of them, and they gave him the name. You think he wouldn't be that attached to it. Secondly, he obviously needs to avoid the Empire now. Even if Solo, Star Wars story, was his given name, he would still do well to change it anyways. Thirdly, by the end of this film, he no longer flies solo. He has a partner, Chewie, and they are apparently inseparable for the next 10 years. By the time A New Hope comes around, he should be Han Duo. Han and friends. Han gets along with people sometimes. Han codependent. Han totally platonic life partner. To be fair, how Han Solo, a Star Wars story, met Chewie is probably the only part of this movie that I liked. Yeah, it's weird that he knows some words in Wookiee and no other humanoid has spoken that language before or after this movie. It's a decent enough reason to believe that Chewie would decide to listen to a stranger, so I'll let that slide. They work together and escape. It's a nice scene, different than what I expected. If the whole movie had been about them learning to work together and going on adventures, it might have been watchable. Also, I guess Chewie eats people sometimes. That's canon now. I mean, they weren't Wookiees, so technically it wasn't cannibalism. But still. Also, Han made a joke about pulling people's arms out of their sockets in episode 4, so of course he has to do that once in Solo, a Star Wars story. So they do a train heist, but it goes to because it's early in the film and things can't go right for the scrappy underdogs yet. So now they're in debt to a mob boss, played by the bad guy from Firewall. This was almost a good thing. Jeffrey Chaucer does a nice job. I really like that guy. But he's only in 2 scenes. And they're in the same room, so I imagine he filmed all his parts in like a day. If they'd cut some of the other bullshit and focused on him as the antagonist, it probably would have improved things. So Beckett is like this mentor figure to Han Solo, a Star Wars story. Then his wife, girlfriend, friend with benefits, whatever, she dies on the mission for like no reason. It's so sad. We were really attached to whatever her name was. So, sad moment. We kneel at the gravestone and Beckett mourns for his lover for 16 seconds. Literally 16 seconds. No one mentions her again, and he's like,
now comes the time for grieving. And then we move on.
This movie has no time for feelings. There are several setups to big emotional moments. This one, being split up at customs, Jon Favreau dying, the big reveal, Kira abandoning him, none of them land. The movie wants to have powerful scenes, but won't pause for more than half a minute to actually have the tone change or the characters even be sad. Whatever it pretends to be, Solo, Star Wars story, is extremely shallow, even for a Star Wars movie. And that is saying something these days.
Grittiness of this movie that validates me as an adult who likes a children's fantasy series.
Seriously, Lord and Miller's 90-minute toy commercial had more heart than this. Alright, and the girl. The love of Han Solo, a Star Wars story's life. I haven't mentioned her yet because she's completely disposable to the plot. Anywho, he had to abandon her on the shithole planet in the only genuinely emotional scene in the entire movie, but now she just happens to be working for the mob boss that this new mentor figure that he just happened to meet also works for. What a coincidence! Can you believe that in this universe, with its many planets inhabited by people that can travel between star systems with relative ease, populated by what must be trillions upon trillions of people, that these two star-crossed lovers randomly bump into each other? Because I sure as can't! You remember Coruscant from the prequels? It's a city so large, it covers the planet. Just one! Wikipedia says that 1 trillion people live there alone. I mean, I know you should never tell Han Solo, a Star Wars story, the odds, but... Wait, did anyone tell him the odds in Solo, a Star Wars story? I honestly don't remember. In my defense, my brain was basically mush by the end. But if they didn't reference it, it must have taken a Herculean feat of strength. Or maybe it was in the Lord and Miller screenplay and they had to purge it lest any cleverness seep into the finished project. Alright, for a brief second there, it feels like the girl's story is going somewhere. Like she's putting a fake smile on that hides a world-weary soul that has seen some shit. Han Solo, a Star Wars story, seems surprised when she starts talking like she's an old hand at these kinds of dirty dealings. And I almost wondered if it foreshadowed a darker turn, delving into the idea that the overconfident attitudes that both of them present are just defense mechanisms for some very, very damaged people. People who can't trust and learn the hard way that without trust, there can be no love. Ha! Right! We don't get anywhere near that level of emotional complexity, and you are a fucking moron if you suspected otherwise. God, I hate her character. Not only is she unnecessary, but she starts off as the main motivation for Han. Then just a few minutes later shows up totally fine. But this doesn't change Han's motivations. He still needs to do the job to get money, but this time to save her from gangsters. And if she were different, changed by this experience, then maybe there'd be a reason to do this. But from that point on, she waffles back and forth from hardened mafia lieutenant to cute love interest with no clear reason why. You could justifiably assume that, from the ending, she's just manipulating Han, but the way she shows her darker side right in front of him makes this confusing. Furthermore, she looks regretful as she flies away, like she had no choice and we're supposed to feel sorry for her. Well, guess what? I don't. So I have no idea what, if anything, remains of the original script in the finished product. The way that Hollywood works means that Lord Miller either can't or won't talk about the details of what happened. But seeing how the movie we got was so concerned with sucking the franchise's and being boring and derivative, I have to imagine that their original version was going to be the opposite of that. Lord and Miller have a track record of making clever, unpredictable, and subversive movies. Even when they work with established properties like Lego or 21 Jump Street, they manage to love the source material while simultaneously doing something new and unpredictable and kind of taking the piss at the same time.
That is against the instruction!
Fine. They make good stuff. Music, dairy products, coffee, TV shows, surveillance systems, all history books, voting machines. Wait a minute.
I'm almost certain that their Solo, a Star Wars story, would say something about the Star Wars universe and lovingly show Han while also commentating on his flaws. Basically, the rumor was that it was getting too silly, because Star Wars was never silly. Not at all. That was probably too much of a financial gamble for the higher-ups, and Lord Miller wouldn't cave to their demands, so they got canned. So, like Ant-Man before it, I can only wonder what vastly more creative and interesting movie we missed out on because studios tried to force my favorite directors to toe the line. Anyway, so they're gonna steal some raw fuel, because Star Wars has fuel now. Thanks, Last Jedi. We really needed that. Where are they gonna steal it? Kessel, of course. Did you seriously think they were gonna do a Solo, Star Wars story movie and not milk that particular teat? Which brings us to the Kessel Run. The f***ing Kessel Run. Apparently it's a shipping channel through a dangerous space cloud? Weird. When I was a kid, I always assumed it was a race or maybe some kind of daredevil move that pirates do for bragging rights. I mean, why else would Solo, a Star Wars story, just drop that name in a bar on a backwoods planet to a farm boy who has presumably never been off-world? I guess this particular shipping channel is famous all across the galaxy? Which is why it needs to be explained in Solo, a Star Wars story, when they see it for the first time. You never heard of the Millennium Falcon? Oh, that ship from that secret mission to steal from slavers to give to mob bosses? Yeah, of course I heard all about that in my yurt 100 miles from civilization. So yeah, they do the thing and they're gonna escape. But then I've realized something. So they're flying away from the bad guys, who are in TIE fighters, and they escape by entering a dangerous area of space. The foolhardy bad guys follow anyway and are destroyed by the things that Han dodges. And then the monster. I don't care if it's bigger and it has tentacles, it's a space monster that wants to eat the Falcon. Oh, and he also turns the ship sideways to squeeze between some rocks, like in episode 5. Like all of this is in episode 5. I have seen this movie before, but done better. There is a point where a story can cross the line from being a reference or homage into repetition. This one blows past it by a parsec. There is a glaring retroactive continuity failure in episode 5 now, because I can't believe that all of that happens during the asteroid scene and Han doesn't say something like, "I've got the strangest feeling of deja vu," or more like, "I've done this exact thing before." My life is an unchanging loop from which I cannot escape. Seriously, if they were writing episode 5 now, there's no way he wouldn't see the giant monster's teeth at the end of the tunnel and say, oh, not again.
We live in loops, as tight and as closed as the hosts do.
Speaking of parsecs, they make a big point of explaining that, yes, they do know that it's a measure of distance, not time, and that it's a weirdly specific situation where we're talking about a dangerous shortcut, not a race. Han emphasizes that it's 12 parsecs specifically, even though we're told when they first arrive at Kessel that nobody ventures off the path and lives. So really, any number of parsecs shorter than the main road would be impressive. Furthermore, he accomplishes this feat through skilled piloting, dumb luck, and the galaxy's best navigator's brain plugged into the computer. Not only is speed not the key factor in the fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy's success, turns out it's not even fast enough to escape. It's only through dumping the raw unobtainium into the fusion engine, which it apparently has, can they go fast enough to escape from the gravity well's pull.
But if we put one drop in the fusion reactor, it might just give us the kick we need.
Okay, I'm done recafoobling the energy motron, or whatever.
Also, speaking of parsecs, we have this whole section now that explains that they know what a parsec is, and that it's a real word. In this section, they show a gravity well, which tries to suck them in. Its pull is so strong that it literally rips the face off the space monster, which was just ew. The problem? Gravity wells are also a real thing. And shocker, they use it wrong. A gravity well describes the gravitational effect of a large body in space. It does not exist on its own. It is not a thing. Having a well without a planet is like having a tsunami in the Sahara. It is a real word, but it sounds like you don't know what it means. In this case, what I think they wanted was a black hole, but wanted it to look red and flashy. So they didn't think they could call it that. Might as well have been the devil's anus for all the scientific accuracy we're going for here. And speaking of defaced space monsters, this giant thing just flies through space with some sort of organic propulsion system that's as fast as the fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy, and lives like 3 minutes away from a deadly black hole, and it's easily lured into diving into it. What the f***? And on top of that, are they supposed to be going faster than light? Because a parsec, which they totally know is a unit of distance, happens to be about 3.26 light years. They specifically say that they can't go to hyperspace in the cloud, and that they made the run in 12 parsecs. So that's roughly 39 light years, meaning that if they were going exactly the speed of light, it would take 39 years to get through the cloud. The whole scene takes like 10 minutes, so I'm guessing they're going far faster than light speed.
That just raises further questions.
So for starters, if he is he manually steering and dodging things at FTL? Not to mention the fact that if you're steering by sight, then going faster than the light your eyes are observing means that you won't be seeing obstacles until after you've hit them. And Last Jedi showed us what happens when you do that. Now, Star Wars has always played fast and loose with physics, and has never given us a good frame of reference for how fast anything actually travels. The only time that speed is really an issue is in Last Jedi. And the physics of that story are so wrong, I'd have to do a whole nother one of these just to explain it. Anyway, so Donald Glover is great. Just like, in general. A couple of times he really sounded like he was channeling Billy D. Williams in this. He really did as well as one can in this role. But I guess Lando is pansexual now? To be clear, I have no problem with that. He is smarmy and suave enough to sweep all genders and races off their feet. But I heard this from the writer's mouth in an interview. I would never have guessed just from watching the movie. The only relationship he had was with a droid co-pilot. This may come as a shock, but it is possible to have a deeply emotional relationship with someone and not want to f*** them. Sure, L3 made a comment about thinking that he was in love with her, but she was kind of shown to be in her own little world, so I assumed it was a joke. Apparently not. Also, I guess they admitted that human-robot sex is possible? So that's interesting. No offense to L3, but she doesn't look like she'd be that comfortable to hug, much less get freaky with. Maybe there's some pads you can stick on her?
That works.
Side tangent. The girlfriend says she's done things in her past. So we can talk about robo-sex but not space hookers? Disney, a family company! I mean, I'm all for inclusion, but I don't think that's what this is. It's just weird and sudden and doesn't really communicate that intent. I can appreciate being subtle, especially about something like someone's sexuality, but nothing in this movie is subtle. Nothing! Except this one thing that is so understated that no one even noticed. L3. I don't have much more to say about Lando because he's basically just an impersonation of Billy D. A well done one, but one that doesn't add anything to the character either. But his robot partner? Oh boy. I'm not one of those guys who thinks of SJW as a pejorative term. I can be social, I value justice, and warriors kick ass by definition. But yeah, fine, some people can be really annoying about their chosen injustices. So now Star Wars has some justice to dole out. And it's... slavery is bad? But told more in the language of a radical feminist? Is that just because she has a female voice? It's bizarre enough that a robot actually comments on the fact that droids are seemingly self-aware for the first time in all of Star Wars, much less that they're basically used as slave labor. This was really weird and never resolved, and that robot dies anyways. I mean, I guess she did spark a revolution in the mining camp, but robots wanting to be free never comes up again in all of the movies. As far as I can tell, they still don't have rights 40 years after Solo, A Star Wars Story, and no one cares.
We don't serve their kind here.
What?
Your droids. They'll have to wait outside. We don't want them here.
They don't even serve our kind here.
Also, isn't it great knowing that all your old favorite Star Wars characters were slave owners now? Yeah, that's the thing. Luke owned slaves. He was gonna take R2 down to have his memory wiped. Remember that? And then, I'm not actually sure that L3 was supposed to be a hero, fighting for a noble cause. One could just as easily interpret her behavior as mocking the stereotypical SJW.
Oh, why? Because you're my organic overlord?
And then, is it really appropriate to have in Star Wars at all? This fictional universe takes place in a galaxy far, far away. Should anything they talk about be topical at all? I never got that feeling in the original trilogy, and even if Palpatine was supposed to be George W. Bush in the prequels, it's still more a story about the fall of democracy than a parody of an actual person. Also, the politics were the worst part of those movies anyway.
I love democracy.
I don't hate them for trying to commentate on something. I just hate them for making my throwback fantasy prequel movie feel modern. And now we have a new retroactive continuity problem in episode 5. L3 is kinda still alive now in the ship. I mean, unless they replace the computer, my guess is she's still in there. Kinda weird that the outspoken social justice no man controls me character gets jammed into the ship and is now forever trapped inside it. I suppose this is meant to explain how C-3PO talks to the ship in episode 5, which has the most peculiar dialect?
I don't know where your ship learned to communicate, but it has the most peculiar dialect.
Does C-3PO have trouble understanding feminists or something? Or is he like, ew, it's an SJW? I mean, she seemed to speak perfect Galactic Basic in Solo, A Star Wars Story. Anyway, in episode 5, Lando hasn't seen the ship for quite some time when it shows up in Cloud City. With what we know from Solo, Star Wars Story, you'd think he would remember that his co-pilot basically lives inside it and maybe want to see her, you know, because he took a laser to the back to try and save her and wept as she died in his arms. Maybe he thinks about that sometimes? Guess not. Also, he calls the Falcon the fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy. In Solo, A Star Wars Story, the ship looks brand spanking new, and young Lando brags about the custom features it has. Nobody calls it junk then. Of course, as soon as Solo, A Star Wars Story, flies it, it gets pretty banged up. We don't see exactly how long it is before the rematch with Lando in the card table, but I'm guessing not long enough that he would lovingly call his best ship junk. And then Han Solo, A Star Wars Story, does the thing where he acts really mad at Lando, then hugs him, just like Lando did in episode 5. Now I have to see that scene as, seeing you brings back a few things. Yeah, I was really surprised by the thing you did back at the ship. Really? It was the same thing you did to me the last time I saw you. Oh, right. Wow, I forgot that completely. I didn't. I thought about it a lot. Every day. For 10 years. All their interactions in Cloud City really make it seem like they had more history than just 2 encounters. Of which the first ends with Lando saying he never wants to see Solo, the Star Wars story, again. And the second ends with him losing his favorite ship. I don't really get the feeling that they were old buddies. It's subjective, but it just doesn't line up to me. And then we come to the last act, where the antagonist... Side note, I got to the next part of my script, and I was confused. Like, what am I talking about here? Because I didn't remember this part of the movie. That's how deeply invested I got in this. And then we come to the last act, where the antagonist that has this history with Beckett, but Solo, a Star Wars story, has only seen once, reveals themselves. They take off the mask, and it's a girl who... I have no idea. The camera lingers on her like this is some big reveal, and I'm scratching my head and trying to remember if we've seen her before. I thought that maybe she was Beckett's kid or something, but no. It's just supposed to be shocking because she's female, I guess. Oh, well, she's working with the rebels. You thought this was a personal story about Solo, a Star Wars story's origins? Nope, still tied directly into the central conflict of the original trilogy, with its black and white good and bad guys. You may have assumed from the original trilogy that Solo, a Star Wars story, never actually directly confronted the Empire before or assisted any of the rebels before. But no, he has. It's canon. And overall, it's just the myriad of tiny little callbacks. Han threatens a mob boss with a thermal detonator. Beckett wears the same mask as Lando from episode 6. Their sneaking inside plan involves putting handcuffs on Chewie. There's a weird music performance in a mobster's lair. You're gonna angle the rear deflector shield? Oh, Chewie has to do it. Yeah, that's what he does, right. So many callbacks. And it's not just that they take me out of the movie, it's that there's so many that it literally takes time away from where they could actually be doing new things. They meet in a dungeon. The Valacord, Chewie's bandolier. Minox, price on your head. Mandalorian armor. He says Han, not Han. XCV-100. Aura Singh. Dejarik. Capes. Terrace Cassie. Han has a feeling. Lost the radar dish in escape pod. I know. This f***ing tube-face guy. And that's just what I could find. I bet there's even more. Bosk! F***ing Bosk! This guy doesn't say anything in the background of episode 5. With the planet, even Dathomir is a reference? At least this is the first one without C-3PO. Wait, what? Anthony Daniels plays a robot in this one too? So we did it all! Chewie, Lando, the gun, the Falcon, the Kessel Run, working for Jabba, everything that could be a reference to the past in the original trilogy has been explained. There's just one problem now. There are 10 years between Solo, the Star Wars story, and A New Hope. So according to this, Han started out as a street rat, joined the Empire, and then in the course of a few days, maybe a week, it's not shown, everything changed about his life. And then nothing else happened for the next decade. He didn't hire a crew, he didn't get a new ship, didn't get a better gun, didn't make new friends, didn't do anything that comes up in episode 4. The one thing that doesn't get explained between these two movies is what happened with dropping the cargo that made Jabba so mad that he sent an assassin to kill him. I'm pretty sure they just couldn't find a way to jump 10 years ahead and show that part. And, probably too many people complained about CGI Carrie Fisher to make them want to make a young Harrison Ford for that scene. Speaking of Greedo, Han shoots first in this one. Yay! Oh, the fangasms! Of course, just like all the Expanded Universe books, the theatrical versions of the original trilogy are no longer canon. Officially, Han does not shoot Greedo first. He shoots him second. That is canon. Don't care if you like it, I personally hate it, but that's the official way that scene goes down. So, when he was young, he had a soft spot for the underdogs and sacrificed his payday to help others, but he still shot his enemies first. When he got older, and once again seems like he only looks out for number one, but he lets his enemies take the first shot. So, it's self-defense, not murder. And that's the big thing. In Solo, a Star Wars story, he has a character arc. He has some experiences and makes a choice at the end that reflects what he learned. It's just that this is the exact same arc from A New Hope. So yeah, Solo, a Star Wars story, your life is a pointless loop. I guess you find a way out in episode 7 though. And last, but certainly least, the twist ending. We finally learn who Vision was working for. I hadn't been thinking or caring about that at all, and it means nothing to the plot. And Han Solo, a Star Wars story, doesn't actually see it himself, but
Boom! Big reveal!
motherfucking Darth Maul.
Oh, it's you!
Because they still had to have a goddamn lightsaber in this movie. Just whips it out at the end for no reason. It's like, hey kids, remember this guy? He had this cool double-bladed lightsaber. Oh look, here it is! Even though Obi-Wan broke his old one and sliced him in half and threw him down a bottomless pit. And he isn't even mentioned in episodes 2 or 3. And he has nothing to do with the movie you're currently watching. You like being reminded of things regardless of context, right? Sure you do.
Give me the wallet.
When that happened in the theater, I punched a fist into the air. Not in excited triumph like a good little fanboy, but because I imagined that Ron Howard's face was right there. I don't care if he was in the cartoon. I didn't watch the cartoon. I'm not gonna watch the cartoon. I shouldn't have to watch the cartoon. I like Han Solo for the stuff that Han Solo was in. Once. Just once. I want a Star Wars movie that has no lightsabers. Is that so much to ask for a Star Wars movie that is its own thing and not just a link in an endless chain of nostalgia-fueled, mass-produced, global market-minded money grabs? But I'm not sure it is possible. It's starting to seem like Star Wars is lightsabers. It is the Force. It is impractically designed spaceships. Everything else we've seen from the Disney-era movies is just callbacks to established stories and characters. Not one stands alone. And arguably, none avoid having at least a few awkwardly shoved-in scenes. I'm looking at you, butt-faced guy from episode 4 in Rogue One. Oh yeah, I don't think I missed you. I'm really starting to wonder if, despite being a huge, magical universe, Star Wars is actually a limiting factor in terms of what stories can be told. With the tie-in to the rebellion at the end, it's really starting to seem like they just can't make a fully original movie in this universe. Or maybe just never intended to in the first place. I remember thinking that the only way that Solo, a Star Wars story, might have been enjoyable to me is if they took out every reference to the original trilogy and replaced Han Solo, a Star Wars story, with an original character, having an original adventure that didn't tie into the established Rebel Empire story that we already know the ending to. But then, would it still be Star Wars? I would hope that you could do that. Have a totally new story set in a totally new place with a totally new character. But when you need a world-conquering movie studio to give you $300 million to make it, maybe you can't. So in the end, it's like I said, your enjoyment of this movie is purely subjective. You can like it for the same reasons I hate it. That is not inherently wrong. What I find less subjective is the filmmaker's intent. While it's possible that I'm misreading things, it really seems like this was a soulless cash grab. A naked attempt to manipulate people's nostalgia while eroding decades of goodwill for this franchise in the name of the almighty dollar. This is not a movie made by people who had a story to tell. This is not a group of artists with a grand vision. This is not a film that has any reason to exist. This is a work that you can enjoy. But I hope you don't. I hope you're up in arms, filled with righteous anger, demanding better from the people who hold the reins of this once beloved world. And while that's my opinion, I think of it this way. Subjectively, I don't like cigarettes. I think they smell bad. I think they're too expensive. Other people like them. They think they smell good. They think it's worth the cost. And neither of us are wrong for how we feel about them. But objectively, factually, in all the research and in my personal experience, Solo: A Star Wars Story actually gave me cancer.
If you do one more thing, I'm gonna unleash my secret weapon.
Your secret weapon?
Yes. It's called the power of the special.
That sounds dumb.
All right. Here it comes. My secret weapon is this.
What is that? Is it super small? I don't see anything.
No, I want you to join me. Look at all of these things that people built. You might see a mess.
Exactly. And a bunch of weird, dorky stuff that ruined my perfectly good stuff.
Okay, what I see are people inspired by each other and by you. People taking what you made and making something new out of it. You don't have to be the bad guy. You are the most talented, most interesting, and most extraordinary person in the universe. And you are capable of amazing things because you are the special. And so am I. And so is everyone. The prophecy is made up, but it's also true. It's about all of us. Right now, it's about you. And you still can change everything.
I'm going to give you guys my card and hope to hear from you again. And if you have any friends or family that eat poop and would like to stop, give them my number.